On today's show, Jalen Green wins his first ever Western Conference Player of the Week award and why his post-All-Star break play feels like the real deal and something that he can build on moving forward. Plus, we take a look at the Houston Rockets play-in tournament chances. Can they beat out the LA Lakers for that final play-in tournament spot? All of that and so much more coming up on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and a credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day. Thank you for being an everydayer, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for making the show part of your day every single day. And also shout out, thank you to everybody who expressed their concerns when I said that I was sick and I missed that, a couple shows at the end of last week. I do really appreciate that. Feeling much, much better now. I was still a little bit under the weather and during our last episode, recapping the Cavaliers game with Madison, but I am right as rain now, and I really did appreciate everybody reaching out and all the well wishes and everything. That means a lot to me. Thank you. Joining us now is none other than your weekly co-host, the Podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Twitter at Ben DuBose. And we're here celebrating. We're rocking our Margarita Monday shirts in honor of Jalen Green winning his first ever Western Conference Player of the Week award. He helped lead the Houston Rockets to a 3-0 record after the unfortunate injury to Alperen and Sengun. This team has not missed a beat. They continue to be one of the hottest teams in the NBA right now. And Jalen Green being recognized for his impressive level of play this past week. Ben, he's only the second Houston Rockets player to win a Western Conference Player of the Week award since James Harden. Alperen and Sengun won his Western Conference Player of the Week award earlier this season back in January. Jalen Green picking up his Player of the Week award from his play this past week. And it's a sign of how this team has really progressed and individually how Jalen Green has grown as the season has moved along.
Yeah, absolutely. And consider that we're not even a month from when many of us suspected that he might lose his starting job. Ime Udoka hinted at changes going into the All-Star break, and I went back and looked at the calendar. It wasn't until the Wednesday practice out of the All-Star break, the 21st of February, that we finally got confirmation that Ime was going to stay the course. And say what you will, it's a lot for a young guy like Jalen Green to go through. I think he's been through the most changes of anyone when you look at the organization, what happened the last couple of years to the way things are now. And for him to take all the criticism, we know what's happened online and on social media. We know even if Ime wasn't as direct with his criticism, it did not take a genius to figure out that Jalen was at least someone whose spot was under evaluation. And for him to channel that in the right way and to not curl up in a ball, but instead come out of the All-Star break with something to prove, I think that speaks well to Jalen, the player. And I also think it speaks well to Jalen, the person, that he takes this criticism, this skepticism the right way. And he seemingly has used it to channel it into a better version of himself. And what's interesting to me, now, he certainly deserves the Player of the Week award in this current 5-game winning streak. He's averaging more than 25 points per game on strong efficiency overall and from three-point range. But what's actually stood out to me, Jackson, about this recent stretch is that he hasn't had the bad games, the truly dreadful ones, because that's always been, for me, the real test with Jalen. The high points have been there, going back to when he was a rookie. The question is, could he avoid the lowlights that pretty much offset them and make it tough for a guy like Ime Udoka to depend on him? And the last one I recall was that Memphis game before the All-Star break, when he had like 4 points, 2 of 11 shooting, and didn't even play in the last 18 minutes of that game. I think just had 20 minutes total. A bad game for Jalen since the All-Star break is something like 16 points, 5 rebounds, maybe 5 of 12, 5 of 13 shooting, and he's still playing 30 minutes because he's valuable defensively. And that's why I really liked one of the answers he gave after this recent homestand. I think it was the Washington game. Someone asked him post-game what he has really focused on since the All-Star break, since his spot was under review. And he said defense. And I thought that was a really great answer, because that's the one thing that's going to keep Jalen on the floor, especially post Alperen Sengun. The Rockets need his offensive creativity. Even if the shots aren't going in, just having Jalen out there as a creator, as an athletic guy that can go out and get a bucket and put some pressure on the rim, that has value. He's just got to make sure that he is not giving up whatever he scores on the other end, because if for one reason or another the vibes aren't right, we've seen what's happened in the past with him just sort of retreating into a shell defensively. That hasn't happened of late. It's why he stayed out there more. And when he stays out there more, at a bare minimum, he's going to give you, something like 16 points, 5 or 6 boards, and be respectable. That to me has actually been the difference. Of course, I'm excited for him to win Player of the Week, but what's really stood out to me is that he's avoided the real low floor games that he's had in the past. The floor has been elevated, and that to me is just a much better version of Jalen Green.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was after the win against the Cavaliers where Fred VanVleet just flat out said Jalen's been playing his ass off. And we know that, work ethic wise and the, desire to be great has always been there. It's been kind of just the issue of translating that success to the court in a consistent manner. That's, we've never had questions about the insane highs with Jalen's game. We've seen it all the way back, like you said, dating back to his rookie season. His ability to, when he's playing at his best, at his peak level, he's sensational, right? He looks like a future, multi-time all-star when he's at his peak. It's been the dangerous lows that have been problematic, dating back to, specifically even earlier this season, which is where a lot of the discourse and discussion kind of came about, with Jalen's role being in question, his role as a starter, whether or not moving him to the bench was the right move, or potentially even trading him would be the right move, because there was a lot of concerns about, can Jalen get to a point where he is consistent on a game-to-game basis, or at least, like you said, eliminating the complete lows. And I even argued at one point that if you could eliminate both the extreme highs and the extreme lows from Jalen's game, he would be a more valuable player, just because, you need somebody that you can rely on, right? Consistency is the name of the game at this level, especially when you are trying to be a focal point of an offense, right? You can't have an offense, where you're the number one option or even the secondary option, where you have nights where you just completely don't show up, or where you can't get anything going offensively. So those have by and large been eliminated since the, second half of the, well, not second half of the season, post All-Star break stretch of this season. And it's nice for Jalen to be able to get that recognition. And to your point about him being valuable out there, even when he is quote unquote having a bad game, I think that's been, a very important development here, where earlier this season, there were very clear signs that Ime Udoka was dedicating time to Jalen Green, even when there were other players on the roster that might have been better in that given moment. Maybe you make an argument that Aaron Holiday would have been a better defender, better shooter situationally, or other players on the roster, a Tari Eason type, might have deserved to close out some games over Jalen Green back when he was healthy, that kind of thing. But now we're seeing the results of that patience pay off, to where Ime gave Jalen those chances, kind of took the lumps that came with it. But now we're seeing a Jalen Green that is actually a plus defender. He's become a great point of attack defender. The other day against the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? He had some great possessions guarding Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland. Moments like that where those possessions wouldn't have been there earlier this season, right? He's become a much better team defender, understanding his rotations, understanding where he needs to be to help his teammates out. And so for the Rockets, especially now as their defensive identity has kind of shifted more so to this, switch everything scheme 1 through 5, that's become incredibly important now that Jalen is not a liability on that, and it is arguably even a plus level player on the defensive end of the court most nights.
Yeah, and let's give a hat tip to Ime Udoka, because you could argue that Ime staying the course with Jalen Green through the All-Star break could end up being the biggest decision he made this entire season. And we talk well of Ime all the time. He's had a great year. He's played an enormous role in getting the Rockets from the 20-win laughingstock that were the last couple of years to a team that now looks like they're going to finish with 35 to 40 wins and at least be in play-in consideration. Just a phenomenal coaching job by Ime Udoka all year. But we all knew going into the All-Star break, 9-18, there were a number of directions that they could have gone. There was pressure to change for the sake of change. It's not easy to lose that many games or for it to be that ugly the way it was right before the break. So it took some guts to stay the course. And I'm sure tell others within the organization, yeah, I understand how bad this has been, but I think it's right just to play it out the way it was, and then to get rewarded this quickly. Again, not even a month. I think it was already a good year for Ime Udoka no matter what. this might make it a great year. To me, staying the course with Jalen and then unlocking this version, perhaps by, giving either maybe, extending an olive branch, look at that as a sign of good faith, or maybe it was something of a, kick to the behind. And, Jalen has played better ball because he felt threatened. There's multiple ways you can look at it. But the bottom line is the Rockets have had a better version of Jalen Green since everything went down over the All-Star break. And I don't see how it doesn't reflect very well of Ime Udoka.
We're going to take a 10,000-foot view on Jalen Green's play post All-Star break and whether or not this is the real deal version of Jalen Green, hopefully one that we can get moving forward permanently, not just in the back half of an NBA season. We're also going to take a look at the Houston Rockets' remaining schedule and their chances to make the play-in tournament this season. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, size, and budget. They do all the shopping for you. It's the easiest way to update your wardrobe this season. All you do is give your stylist your size, style, and budget preferences, order boxes when and how you want, no subscription required, and they send you 5 just for you pieces, plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice. You keep what works and send back the rest. Stitch Fix makes it all so easy. You don't have to shop in person anymore. You can just send them all of your desired, taste, budget, everything. Plus, you get outfits that make you look and feel so great about yourself. And if you don't love something, just send it back. Shipping, returns, and exchanges are always completely free. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That's stitchfix.com/lockedon. stitchfix.com/lockedon. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Ben, we've seen Jalen Green make these kind of leaps every year so far in his NBA career after the All-Star break. He's very much, quote unquote, a second half player, if you will. And there are a lot of players like that in the NBA where they just, they pick up their play as it goes along, or, certain players like shout out to Rockets legend Eric Gordon, who become, basically unstoppable in the month of March. What I'm curious though is, what are we seeing from Jalen Green? And I've got thoughts on this. I want to hear what you think about his recent play as of late. What are we seeing from Jalen that gives us confidence that this is, hopefully a version of him that is a more permanent version of Jalen Green, things that he can carry forward in his career, things that he can, build upon and hopefully carry into next season, to where we don't get the same situation where, it's a promising back half or close to the season like what we saw at the end of his sophomore campaign. And then, he starts his, junior year, his third year in the NBA this season, and it's kind of, things look really rough again, right to start. So what are we seeing from Jalen post All-Star break that you think he can carry forward, as part of his game permanently?
Yeah. So first things first, I think we should highlight that at least over the last 5 games, which the Rockets are 5-0, his plus minus is plus 8.8. This is the first time that we've seen a run like this from Jalen, where all the under the hood numbers suggest that he is clearly contributing to winning. So a lot of these stretches, especially his first couple of years, the top line statistics may have been very impressive, but there was something underneath that made you sort of question if it was contributing to winning. Now, of course, there's an asterisk you can put on that with the fact that the rosters the last 2 years were pretty much a joke. So it's hard to say how much is on Jalen and how much is on the roster. But this is the first time that we've seen, at least that I recall, a sustained showing like this from Jalen that has also come with positive team-wide numbers. And so that tells me that he's doing it in a way that's contributing to winning. As far as what's happened with this game, another note that I want to throw out there. So I think there's going to be a lot of people fixating on the fact that he won Player of the Week immediately after Alperen Sengun went out. And that's true. But at the same time, his uptick predates the Sengun injury. He was playing better before Alp went out. So while I'm sure some will wonder, we've made the case before on this pod that Jalen is a rhythm player, and can he get enough touches, get enough shot attempts to stay in rhythm when he's playing alongside other high usage guys like Fred VanVleet and Alperen Sengun that may be better in a given game. I'm not going to say there's nothing to that anymore, but let's not oversimplify it the way I'm sure some will and say, well, he just took off once Alp went out, and now it's because Jalen's driving the bus. No, he made some substantive improvements before All P went out that he was already introducing to his game, and the numbers were already showing it. It's just gone up to another level the last 3 games since the Sengun injury. As far as what we've noticed, I would say that the biggest thing that stood out to me, and this is really simple, it's the finishing at the rim. He just looks so much more composed. The footwork looks better. I know he's constantly looking at film with Ben Sullivan, with his coaches, to try and get better at his technique. He doesn't take the awkward angles. He seems to be much more confident finishing through traffic. I don't know what he did over the All-Star break, but that to me is what's really stood out. The shooting, he didn't suddenly become an elite shooter overnight. That's going to have some ebbs and flows. But for me, his ability, I would say it's a combination of 2 things. Certainly the finishing in general has gotten better. He's able to finish through contact in ways that he hasn't in the past. But I also think the footwork has gotten better to where sometimes the angles aren't quite as awkward as they've been in the past. He's not as out of control. And because his balance is better, then he's able to finish through that bit of contact for a 3-point play or what otherwise have been, free throws if you're lucky. And so that to me has been the biggest thing for Jalen. It's that when he goes to the bucket, I'm confident. It's not even so much about the fouls. I mean, yeah, it would help if he draws more free throws, and he's done that a little bit of late. It's more when he gets to the bucket and he uses his speed, I trust now that he is going to actually be able to finish. And he's done it with both hands. He's done it with the right hand. He's also done it with the left hand when he's, going across the lane. So that is what has really, stood out to me. And it's been pretty consistent ever since the All-Star break. I need to dig into the data more, but just by the eye test, the finishing has gotten a ton better. And once that happens, that unlocks so much else for his game and for the team, especially now that you have this 5-out offense with Jabari Smith Jr. at center.
I'll raise you one on the finishing at the rim because I think it's an extension of his ability to actually just read defenses a little bit better. And some of that comes from, Ime Udoka has been harping, all season on Jalen's ability to make the right reads. And we've seen Jalen grow a lot, as a playmaker. That was one of the areas, dating back to, the past couple seasons with Steven Silas. The playmaking was something right out of the gate that we weren't expecting Jalen to be actually a decent playmaker. He was a better playmaker than I think anybody was ready to give him credit for early in his career. Just running pick and roll with Alperen and Sengun. They developed a very, solid 2-man game very early on. But I think it's more so playing naturally within the flow of the offense and reading how defenses are deciding to guard him, right? If they're giving him the mid-range shot, he's snaking pick and rolls and then deciding, okay, cool, they're dropping low on me, cool. I'm not going to force it. I'm not just going to take the pick and roll or take the pick and then immediately go 100-0 and go dive at the rim and hope that I can create some contact and get to the free throw line. We know that there's at least, probably 2 or 3 drives a game still where Jalen Green goes to the basket, gets contact, and unfortunately doesn't receive a whistle. It seemingly happens at least once or twice a game where there's a pretty egregious no call where Jalen Green drives to the rim and doesn't receive the benefit of the whistle. But that being said, I think he's kind of eliminated some of those kind of, we'll say, reckless drives to the rim, and he's a little bit more calculated about how he does it, right? To your point about finishing through contact, right? Absorbing contact, better body control, all those things, absolutely. But I'll raise you one even better than that, is that I think he's actually doing a much better job of avoiding contact, but in smarter ways. Because previously, we've seen him try to utilize his speed and his agility to get, and he gets a little cute around the rim, right? He'll do those finesse shots where he'll try to get to the other side of the rim and do like that corkscrew layup on the opposite side of the glass. And earlier this season, a lot of those drives and a lot of those finishes around the rim resulted in misses. But now what we're seeing is Jalen is doing a much better job of understanding tempo, right? He's driving, he's using his speed, but he's freezing defenders in place, right? He's either hesitating in the mid-range, making them think that he's going to pull up for a jumper, and then immediately turning the jets back on and getting to the rim past them. He's freezing them using his bigs. He's getting better at navigating screens to be able to open himself up or create opportunities for the roll man in these moments, either Alperen Sengun or most recently, right, Jock, Landale, even Jabari Smith Jr. situationally as a screening presence. And I think that level of just patience and understanding offensively has started to really open things up for him. Like you said, the 3-point shooting will come and go. The 3 ball is going to be something that he's going to have to continue to work on for him to become a true 3-level scoring threat. Because when the 3 ball is falling, he's basically unguardable. But the problem is that 3 ball has been kind of, more so like the Achilles heel of his game, where when that 3 ball isn't falling, we've seen opposing teams really challenge him to hit that three ball, where they're sagging off of him, where they willingly leave him open. There is one statistic that got shared on social media by Todd Whitehead the other day that I thought was really interesting. Numbers about when players go under the pick and roll on a defender. And Jalen Green is actually shooting over 38% on three-pointers where a defender goes under a pick and roll and he actually elects to pull the trigger and shoot that shot. He's in the company of Steph Curry, James Harden, Trae Young, and Luka Doncic as far as percentage of the time that these players elect to shoot the ball when a defender goes under the screen. Steph Curry leads the pack. He shoots the ball 46% of the time when a defender goes under the screen. Jalen Green is right behind him at 42%, and then James Harden at 40%, Trae Young 34%, and Luka Doncic 32%. Now, those aren't the actual percentages from three. Those are the percentage of time that they shoot the ball when a defender goes under the screen. And I thought that was a really encouraging number because it kind of matches the eye test where a lot of Jalen Green's threes, I think, can be boiled down to some of the bad threes are the ones that he rushes into maybe early in transition, or sometimes the ones that he, forces in isolation, right? Where he gets a defender by himself and he hits, a couple dribble moves and then elects to, pull up from three. Those are probably not the best looks for Jalen, but the ones that come within the flow of the offense, that ones that, are generated by getting a good screen and defender making a bad read and going under the screen, those are perfectly good, acceptable three-pointers, and he's actually shooting a respectable percentage on those. Yeah,
absolutely. A couple of things I want to point out. You mentioned pace. I think that's something that could disproportionately benefit Jalen, the faster pace that the Rockets have emphasized since the All-Star break. I asked Ime Udoka about it at one of the games on the recent homestand, and specifically in the context of Fred's performance. And he talked about how early in the year, the emphasis was about lowering turnovers and half-court execution in terms of what the coaching staff was wanting Fred to do. Now, as the season has progressed and defenses have changed how they're covering all P, and rookies that are super athletic, like Thompson and Cam Whitmore, have taken on greater roles. So now you just have a greater proportion of elite athletes in your rotation. They've asked Fred to really turn up the pace, to turn up the heat, if you will, with that offense. And I think it's been, some of it, they made that emphasis during the All-Star break. Some of it's also that Fred used the All-Star break to get healthy. He had some nagging injuries before that. But regardless, I think the Rockets playing at a faster pace, that disproportionately benefits Jalen. And that's something that, again, I don't think it's as simple as, well, Sengun's out. No, he was already doing a lot of this stuff before Sengun went out, just in the 3 or 4 weeks since the All-Star break, but before the Sengun injury. So these are things that they did at a tactical level that are paying dividends for Jalen in particular. A macro point I want to get in as far as the tactical changes. I teased to this earlier, but people really need to remember Jalen was asked to do more in this transition than any other player. When you look at this roster, the way it was constructed going into this year, obviously guys like Fred, Dillon, Jeff Green, Jock Landale, they're new. Rookies, and Thompson, Cam Whitmore, they're new. A lot of the guys that were coming back from last year, Jabari and Tari, number one, they only had 1 year of Stephen Silas. And secondly, they weren't the focal points of the offense. Sengun, as you've talked about plenty, was not really the focal point of the Stephen Silas era Rockets. Kevin Porter Jr. left in September and was never heard from again. Jalen Green was the only guy reporting to camp this year with the new look Ime Udoka, serious about winning Rockets, that had multiple years of Stephen Silas and was the focal point during the Stephen Silas years. So he had the biggest transition of anyone. In terms of these bad habits, all the things they're trying to shake, the rod of losing, if you will, the newcomers didn't apply to them at all. They weren't here. And then guys like Jabari, Tari, and Sengun, there's some of that, but honestly, because they weren't the focal points, there was less to shake off. Jalen, because of the role he was in, and now losing KPJ, he was sort of out on an island when you look at the way this team was constructed and the guy who would be disproportionately harmed by some of the bad things that happened the last couple of years. So to get to what I think is the $64,000 question, is this sustainable? Should you invest in Jalen Green, not just keep him on the roster, but potentially give him a contract extension, so on and so forth? How seriously do you take this run? The case to be made that you should buy in on the current version of Jalen Green is that when you think about it from a macro perspective, it makes sense that it took him a little bit longer than other guys to really get with the program, because relative to other guys on this roster, he had the most to shake off with regards to those bad habits, the rod of losing, however you want to phrase it. So that could be, if you want to look at it from, glass half empty view, or glass half full, I should say, it's not just a random hot streak after the All-Star break. You could make a case that it took Jalen longer because he was asked to go through the biggest transition.
I know that's an absolutely fantastic point. And just to add one more, tidbit to it, I think that you can seriously, I think there is an argument to be made that the pathways that each of these kind of younger players took to get to the NBA also play a factor, right? Jalen going through the G League, Jabari choosing to, go to Auburn, and then Alperen and Sengun, who played professionally before coming to the NBA, right? I think you can make an argument that the situations that Alp and Jabari were in, and especially with Jabari's role being more of an ancillary piece rather than a focal point, but specifically with Alperen and Sengun, right? He played professional high-level basketball in arguably the second or third best league in the world outside of the NBA and won an MVP at that level. So he already played high-stakes, high-level basketball before, so transitioning back to kind of a winning style of play with good winning habits wasn't necessarily much of, the culture shock for Sengun. Whereas for Jalen, right, having played AAU ball predominantly throughout his career, then through the G League Ignite, which, there's still kind of the jury's still out on whether the G League Ignite is actually a good program or not at this point. I think there's just a lot to be said for, you're right. Jalen had the biggest adjustment to make, and credit, like you said in the first segment, to Ime Udoka for staying patient, sticking with Jalen, and hopefully this is something that we continue to see moving forward as we round out this season, and hopefully this is the new permanent version of Jalen Green that Ime Udoka has been able to tap into. But coming up, we want to get into some of the Rockets' chances to make the play-in tournament this season. We'll take a look at their remaining schedule, the games that they would absolutely need to win, and kind of maybe a little bit of a schedule prediction, if you will, for how we think they'll round out this season. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you the access to professionals that you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all of that while making the process easy and intuitive, because LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Ben, as we take a look at the Western Conference playoff standings, the Rockets currently 3 games back of the LA Lakers in the loss column, at the very least, for that final play-in tournament spot. It was actually kind of a nice favor by our good friends, the Golden State Warriors, to beat the Lakers the other night. That was a game where, I know some Rockets fans were hoping the Warriors would actually lose that one, but I think it actually benefited the Rockets more so for the Lakers to take that loss.
The big difference is because the Rockets had the tiebreaker against the Lakers, they don't against the Warriors.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was a big swing in the Rockets' favor. Now, when you look at the remaining schedules for these two teams, the Rockets actually have a slightly tougher strength of schedule for their remaining 15 games. They clock in as the 20th hardest schedule remaining this NBA season. The Lakers clock in at the 22nd most difficult schedule remaining this season. But I think there's something to be said for the fact that the Lakers currently, even though the Rockets are dealing with their own plethora of injuries, no more Alperen and Sengun, it looks like Cam Whitmore is likely going to be done for the rest of the season. I would imagine maybe there's a chance that he comes back.
I think he comes back the last week, but
possibly,
at least for a couple more weeks.
Yeah. So, at this point, I'm not gonna bank on Cam Whitmore coming back. Obviously, Tari Eason already done for the season. So the Rockets have their own set of injuries that they're dealing with, but the Lakers, the way their team is structured, right, and how heavily they rely on LeBron James and Anthony Davis, when those guys are day to day. Anthony Davis has the eye injury that he's currently dealing with, and he's been
LeBron's had the ankle all year.
Exactly. So with those two guys, with the level of banged up injuries, bruises, knickknacks, whatever that they got going on, I think there's something to be said for when you look at these final 15 games that the Rockets have. They actually have a pretty easy schedule, I think, to where realistically, I could see them picking up anywhere from 7 to 10 wins across these final 15 games. And that puts them comfortably in that 39 to 40 win range. Now, whether that's enough to actually secure them that final play-in spot is kind of, is the question that remains. But I think that is a very realistic possibility and puts them in a great position to be at least in the running for that 10th seed in the Western Conference.
Yeah, to put some context to it from a math perspective, if the Lakers go 7-7 over the final 14 games, Rockets need to go 11-4 to make up those 3 games. That's a lot to ask, but it is doable. I mean, there's 7-1 in March. Crazier things have happened. And one thing we should point out with regards to the schedule, in the last 2 weeks of an NBA season, it's not always as it looks on paper. For example, I would say the toughest game for the Rockets, when you look at some of the statistical models and they try to forecast what's going to happen, on paper, that game at the Clippers on April 14th, the finale, is probably the biggest long shot the Rockets have the rest of the way. The only one that's close, maybe the one at OKC in 9 days. But I would say one of those two, Thunder or Clippers on the road. Yet the Clippers, because it's the last game of the regular season and the week of the playoffs, I would be stunned if the Clippers are playing Kawhi, Paul George, and James Harden, maybe at all. And if they do play, my guess is maybe for a half, 20 minutes, unless there is something major to play for, like they might not get home court advantage if they lose that game, and they would if they win it. I would expect the Clippers on the week of the playoffs to be very conservative with their veterans.
And it's worth noting that with the Clippers specifically, it kind of looks like we're barreling towards a 4-5 matchup between the Clippers and the Pelicans. Now, it still remains to be seen which of those teams is the 4 and which of those teams is the 5, for home court advantage purposes. But I do think that your point there makes absolutely perfect sense. Now, unfortunately, the Lakers are kind of also in that same boat. Their final game of the season is on the road against the New Orleans Pelicans. So maybe the Pelicans are also in that same position where they want to rest guys. So
possible, but I'm just saying that on paper, you can't always assume in regards to, these models that try and predict everything out the way you can throughout a year. Strength of schedule in general is not as predictive because not just the final game of the season, even the last week or two, teams that are fairly secure in their playoff spot are going to be a lot more conservative with their veterans, anybody with nagging injuries, because the playoffs are so close and they're thinking bigger picture. But generally speaking, it's a fairly favorable...
Can I also include just the flip side of that is instead of playoff teams actually resting their players, you also have tanking teams that might start egregiously tanking at the end of the season, right? So a game that, might be, midway of the season, January, February, a game that might be viewed as, say, a trap game against like the Portland Trailblazers or something. At the end of the season, the Rockets' second to last game of the season comes against the Blazers. And that's a game where if the Blazers are trying to get, one leg up on another team in the tankathon standings, then they might be trotting out basically a G League team, in that second to last game of the season.
Yeah, that's a perfect point, because another thing I look at with regards to schedules is back-to-backs. The Rockets have 2 left. One is at home, the Warriors and the Heat, so that's difficult from an opponent's perspective, or at least somewhat difficult, but the back-to-back when both are at home is not nearly as challenging because you don't have the travel in between. The second back-to-back is the Jazz and Blazers on the 11th and the 12th, which usually would be very difficult. Those are places a long way away. You got a lot of travel in between, yada, yada, but it's likely to be offset by the fact that both of those teams are going to be tanking the last week of the year. So from a back-to-back perspective, I don't think it's that difficult for the Rockets when you look at their schedule coming up. In general, what I would say, while I certainly don't think it's likely, I do think most of the models, there's a couple that I look at, ESPN's Basketball Power Index, Basketball Reference, have the Rockets in the range of 5 or 6%. I think that's underselling it. I don't think it's anywhere near 50-50. Don't get me wrong. But I also think the 5 to 6% that some of the models are pointing to is a little soft. Because when you look at a 3-game gap with the tiebreaker, and 3 games in the loss column is what's most important because that's what you control. That's how teams control their own destiny. In a sample of 14 or 15 games, that is not that much to overcome. And so one thing I want to, before I explain why, I want to use an example. If you were trying to determine if, say, the Boston Celtics could outplay the Detroit Pistons by 3.5 games over a sample of 14 or 15 games, it would not be that same number. That number is calculated not just based on the games left to play and the current standings, but also based on what these models view the teams in question as being. If it was, for example, the Celtics and the Pistons, the model would say, well, the Celtics are just a way better team than the Pistons, so we have to take that into account when we're looking at the probabilities. When we're talking about the Rockets and the Lakers do not have a sustained track record of success. So models are, I don't want to say super bearish, but they're not super bullish on the Rockets. And obviously a team like the Lakers, the Warriors, has a lot of proven production. LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Steph Curry, Draymond Green. But if there are reasons to believe that the Rockets are better than what the data would suggest. And certainly they played like it this month. If you believe Jalen Green has truly found something, then the Rockets might not be properly accounted for in these models in terms of, they're just taking statistically the way the Rockets have looked to this point. Well, what if the Rockets now are fundamentally a different team than they were even a month ago? Conversely, you look at the Lakers situation. You mentioned LeBron and AD. They've got some nagging injuries. With the Warriors, Draymond Green's had a situation with his back. Steph Curry's had a couple of injuries of his own. It's not as if these teams are necessarily what they look like on paper. And so that's why I think some of those models might be a little soft in the Rockets. Not dramatically, not saying I think it's going to happen. I don't think it's anywhere close to 50-50. I also don't think it's quite 595. I think the Rockets are a little bit better than what their season-long data would suggest based on the form they're in now and the way they seem to have figured something out in the short term with the men starting in place of Alperen, Sengun, and this new look switch everything defense, which, as JB Bickerstaff said Saturday, is sort of tough to adjust to. So that's another advantage to the Rockets, trying some new things on the fly that there's not a ton of tape on. That could give the Rockets, a bump in the short term. And conversely, Lakers and Warriors, veteran teams that have a lot of nagging injuries, there's some reasons to think that they might be a little bit worse than their season-long numbers and the names on the back of those jerseys would typically suggest. So I would just say those models might be a little soft on the Rockets relative to the actual likelihood of what I think they're going to do over the next couple of weeks.
I think my prediction as it stands for these final 15 games, I'm going to say that the Rockets go 9-6 over these final 15. I'm a little bullish on it. I think there's probably about 7 games in there that you can make a very easy argument. Washington, the Bulls, couple against the Utah Jazz, couple against the Portland Trailblazers in there. Maybe, the Magic possibly. There's Magic have been actually really good this season. The final game against the LA Clippers. I think there's about 6 or 7 games that the Rockets should be favorites in. And if they could just take, 2 or 3 other ones in there while taking care of business against the teams that they should beat, then I think 9-6 is a very reasonable prediction, and that has them finishing the year with 41 wins, which I think is such a monumental turnaround from where they were last season that Ime Udoka deserves an absolute metric ton of credit for what he's done this year.
Massive. Aside from the play-in race, just getting to 500 or better would be an incredible accomplishment in and of itself. And, we should also note with the play-in race, it's not like you put up a banner saying, oh, we made the play-in tournament. No, it's not about...
Screw you. I'm putting up a banner if they make the play-in. But
you know what I mean?
I'm putting that banner directly next to the Southwest Division Bubble Champion banner, okay? That's where it's going.
Which it's still not been put up. And I told the Rockets about that. Hopefully they take care of it soon. But when we really talk about the play-in tournament, it's not just about those 2 games that middle week of April. It's about playing relevant basketball through the end of the season and helping to develop your young prospects by putting them on the floor in meaningful games and seeing how they respond and letting them learn from those experiences. So even if the Rockets don't get one of those play-in tournament spots, just being in the conversation until the last week or so of the season, that would have benefits in and of itself. I'm going to be boring. I'll pick 9-6 too. The one thing I'll spotlight, though, these next 4 games are absolutely massive because on paper, the final 11 are difficult. You have a couple of back-to-backs in there as well, as I mentioned earlier. These next 4, these are the ones where if you want to be serious, and I think you need to be at least 9-6 to have a chance. If you're 9-6, the Lakers would need to go 5-9. That's asking a little bit, but it's still within the realm of possibility. I don't think they're going to go like 4-10 or worse would just be like total collapse. And I can't see LeBron letting that happen, assuming he's out there. So 9-6, I think is the...
Well, he's also going to be very busy with his new podcast. So maybe it is possible.
Oh, there you go. And JJ Redick. Yeah. Like 9-6, and you probably need to go like 10-5 or 11-4. But 9-6, I would say, is the worst case for the Rockets where there could be any chance at all of the play-in that wouldn't require like the Lakers or Warriors to just beyond self-implode in a comical way. So I'm going to be optimistic and say 9-6. I don't want to be more aggressive than that because the schedule is difficult. But what I will say, these next 4 games, so Washington on the road, I know it's on the road, but the Rockets have won 4 straight on the road and the Wizards are absolutely dreadful, as we saw last week. And then the homestand, Bulls who are mid, and then the Jazz and Trailblazers who are not good and tanking. I would say these next 4 games, you're going to be favored in all of them. I'll be conservative and say 3-1. But if you can go 4-0, and at that point, you would be on a 9-game winning streak. The momentum you would have at that point, the confidence they would have if you're on a 9-game winning streak, and my guess is the Lakers lose at least 1 or 2 between now and then. that might be the kind of thing that even if on paper, it doesn't look like there's a big delta between the Rockets schedule and the Lakers schedule. If the Rockets have won 9 in a row and are charging that hard, that might be the kind of thing that sort of tightens the collars a little bit in Lakerland, where those guys are thinking about, hey, we might actually could miss the play-in tournament. And that's the last point I'll make. Keep in mind that the Rockets are playing with house money. This is going to be a successful season for the Rockets almost no matter what. I mean, if they lose out the last 15 games, obviously that'd be crazy, but I don't think that's going to happen. If the Rockets are in the conversation, that's good. If the Lakers miss out on the play-in tournament altogether, that's a disaster. That's a tire fire. That is a joke in the prime of LeBron James and Anthony Davis and with all the money they've spent on that team. So if it's close, keep in mind the Rockets are playing with house money. And so that might allow them to play a little bit more loose, put some pressure on the Lakers, and maybe that makes them do some things that they wouldn't otherwise. We'll see. It's a lot to ask for. But I think step one, these next 4 games are an opportunity. If the Rockets are as good as they've looked of late, these are all winnable games. I'll predict 3-1 just because I don't think this team is such a juggernaut that you can take anybody for granted. But Wizards on the road, Jazz, Trailblazers, and Bulls at home, yeah, you should get at least 3 in there. And if you're 8-1 or have won 9 straight, that's the kind of thing that who knows, maybe that does start to put some real pressure on the Lakers and Warriors entering the last 2 weeks of the season.
I'm bullish. I'm saying 4-0 on these next 4 games. We're going for a 9-game win streak, Ben, and then we're going to cap it off with the 10th win on the road against the Oklahoma City Thunder. 10-0. Here we come. All right. On that note, though, we want to know your schedule predictions for these last 15 games for the Houston Rockets. Drop your predictions in the YouTube comments. Will the Rockets make the play-in tournament? That's your bonus comment to add. Let us know in the YouTube comments. But Ben, you know the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down at.
Yep. Ben DuBose on Twitter/X, the Rockets Wire on the same, and rocketswire.usatoday.com for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.